Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I have to ask a favor of you in the room. Just a couple of days ago, I was speaking in a microphone as well, similar to this one. And I was told afterwards that I move all over the place. Without noticing, I do that. And then I tend to move away from the microphone, so the sound is sort of, all over the place. So I'm going to try to stand still. But if I don't, could you please, somebody, let me know so that I can actually get this message across. I want to talk just briefly about a few aspects of increased activity in the Arctic that have to do with the resilience, perception, and risk in transition. I just, for fun, a couple of days ago, Googled climate change, and I got 828 million hits, and that's just Google. So I think it's safe to contend that a discourse on climate change is definitely taking place. How useful all that material is, we don't really know, but it's certainly quite interesting. What we do know is that all things change, and we have to change with them, which I think is sort of at the heart of the whole issue of climate change. What we are looking at are dynamic transitional period with uncertain pathways and outcome, both in terms of climate and also for us here in the Arctic. And primary impacts will manifest themselves through increased pressures on various systems. They will be natural through hydrological, terrestrial, biological, and aquatic subsystems, for instance. Physical, through climate and weather in increased droughts and floods and storms and heat waves. Precipitation levels and patterns, sea levels and river flows, saltwater intrusion, coastal erosion, and coastal storms. It's a fairly bleak image that we're left with when we read about the potential impacts of climate change. Ecological systems will be impacted. Life-sustaining systems, air and water more than likely will be our most valuable resource in a few decades. It already is the cause of conflict in many places in the world today. Social systems, the economic system, the political system, normative systems, it will also impact communities and cultural and historical cultural well-being in various different ways, depending on your geographical location. This all has implications, for instance, for resource scarcity and access to resources, infrastructures, as in the case of the Arctic, movement of peoples, political instability and conflicts, and will probably increase inequality both between nations and peoples and classes. We will have to display adaptive capacity, and we will have to develop and maintain resilience at the international, national, and local levels. We are going to be looking at rapid transitions in certain places, and we will be continuously surprised. The Arctic is also changing. We heard from Ingibjörg just yesterday, telling us about the voyage she took just a few weeks ago, expressing her worries about the rate at which ice is melting. So these are rapidly changing conditions. There are many contradictions in these processes in the Arctic. It is not particularly easy to see how we will engage in sustainable development at the same time as we try to extract the resources and use the shipping lanes. This is a fairly obvious contradiction as far as I'm concerned, but it's one that a lot of people don't seem to be willing to address or speak of. It will have differential impacts depending on geography, vulnerability, adaptive capacity, and resilience levels, both in terms of ecological and social systems. We are going to have to observe and explore these changes and their interactive properties, explore how the social and ecological systems are impacted and what are the implications for the resilience of communities and ecosystems. It's going to be a process which requires a reconciliation between conflicting uses of resources, such as in the case of shipping, extraction of oil, transport of oil, fisheries, and tourism. It's also a process which will have to include a balanced dialogue, something which will probably be a challenge. I know it will probably be a challenge here in Iceland at any rate, between the multiple stakeholders, including communities and peoples. And we're going to have to discuss both the benefits, risks, and negative impacts of new activities. Communities are changing also. As marginal communities start to see opportunities. For instance, in Iceland, we are looking forward to the potential oil coming from Russia, the Dreki area in East Greenland, because it gives us a lot of different opportunities to exploit. We think that perhaps it might be an interesting option to have a transshipment port and other related infrastructure. Service ports for exploration ships, service hub and harbor for oil tankers, perhaps oil storage facilities and oil refineries, or security and rescue centers. The stakes are high in environmental, social and economic terms, because this could mean diversification of economic activity. It could mean benefits at the local, national, regional level. Increased marine transport and activities related to resource extraction or construction of marine infrastructure can have positive socio-economic implications. It could mean employment opportunities for local communities. It could mean new business opportunities for local communities. It can mean change in population dynamics, for instance, in an increase in population, which could improve services and infrastructure. But these changes may not end up being necessarily what these communities expect. There are various concerns, of course. Benefits through employment, business, services, or economic benefits, they tend to leak out of the local economy. So this is something that we have to be watchful of. Learn from other people's experiences in the past. Rapid changes such as these can challenge a community's adaptive capacity, not least in construction periods. This new economic activity, like I said before, can be in conflict with local existing or traditional economic activity. The Arctic ecosystem is particularly fragile and vulnerable to environmental hazards, and the impacts of shipping are considerable. Not to mention that were there to be an accident involving an oil spill off the coast of Iceland, for instance, it would have grave consequences not just for the ecological systems, but also social systems. We have to remember, whether we like it or not, that accidents do happen. And perhaps if I can borrow from Astrid's methodology yesterday, if I had more time, I would probably talk to you a little bit more about the impacts of Exxon Valdez in 1989, the Prestige in 2002 and 2003, or the Deepwater Horizon. But I'm not going to do that. I am, however, going to say a few words about oil, because we still hear voices doubting that it is likely that oil will be extracted from this region. It all, of course, depends on time and technology. But I am absolutely convinced that as soon as time allows and technology allows, this oil will be extracted. We are completely addicted to oil. The world uses approximately 86 billion barrels of oil. That is 40,000 gallons every second. The world population is expected to exceed 9 billion by the year 2050. And in that same time, an increase of 50% is expected in demand of energy. Oil accounted for some 33% of total world energy consumption. And alternatives such as wind and solar account for some 2.2% of global energy consumption. That is an increase of 25% in the 10 or 20 years before, but it's still a very low percentage. There is a debate whether we have reached peak oil or not. I do know that Matt Simmons claims that 58 oil-producing countries are already producing less than they did in the past. That would probably indicate that they have reached their peak. Now, the Arctic is rich in non-renewable resources, and the potential for extraction of oil and gas is significant. It has already started with explorative drilling in various places in the Arctic. Although met with certain challenges like Shell in Alaska, these developments are certainly taking place as we speak. There are major gaps in knowledge and capacity. In the international and national regulatory frameworks, we do have instruments that are useful, and we have recent agreements through the Search and Rescue Agreement and the Oil Spill Task Force, which are very promising. But we should probably try to remember that these are only the first steps, and there is a lot of work to be done yet. We all know that infrastructural and navigational systems, monitoring systems for weather, wind, or ice, are lacking. Hazard management systems are lacking. Physical, ideological, economic, or community rehabilitation systems, at least in Iceland, are lacking. And it is up to us to ensure that necessary expertise exists in terms of knowledge, institutions, processes, and resources. Rescue and cleanup capacity is very little, and in Iceland it is almost non-existent. Cleanup costs, compensation, and in general clarification of responsibilities in specific projects have to be further understood and defined. We need to do some more research. At least I can speak for us here in Iceland. We certainly need to do some more research. We have to get baseline information. We have to explore both the benefits and the risk and agree on a definition of what are benefits and what are risks. I'm not really sure that any sort of exploration has taken place in Iceland in resilience and impacts at local, regional, and national level. We have to conduct a context-based risk analysis and include those in project impact assessments. This is a multi-level and multi-stakeholder process which should include participation in decision-making processes from the community level. And as I said before, we have to reconcile somehow these contradictory stated goals of Arctic states, including Iceland, to follow sustainable development goals at the same time as engage in this, what is a new industry to Iceland. Stringent risk assessment, mitigation, and management should be our goal. Because risk is a very natural thing to look at when you're trying to determine whether or not you want to participate in some sort of activity or project. It is sometimes treated as a very negative thing to talk about risks or worst case scenarios or assessing a risk or management of risk. In some cases, people think you're talking about financial risk. In other cases, people think you're just trying to, prevent progress from taking place. But I can promise you that, for instance, oil corporations are probably doing risk assessment and management every day in their work. And why should we not do the same? We tend to look at the fact that there is a low likelihood of an event taking place. We tend to also forget that a low likelihood of something happening does not mean there is no risk. A common failure of risk assessment, according to Hubbard, is overconfidence and the underestimation of risk factors. We have to engage in not just economic risks, but also both in tangible and intangible elements, short and long-term, and ripple effects. In short, we have to engage in comprehensive, holistic risk assessment, which includes not just feasibility and financial risk, but also community impacts and environmental impacts. We have to, as I said before, identify, analyze and manage risks, because disasters are not isolated events. They're not merely accidents. They are the result of a multidimensional process and exist as complex material events, and at the same time as a multiplicity of interwoven, often conflicting social constructions. I'm there quoting Anthony Oliver Smith. And he also says that disasters come into existence in both the material and social world, and perhaps in some hybrid space between them. It happens through institutions and processes, discourses, social construction of risk, perceptions of risk, and social construction of perception of risk. At the heart of this is that a society's pattern of vulnerability is a core element of a disaster. I have 5 minutes, and that will be fine. I just want to talk a little bit about perception, because it's a word that I throw about all over the place all the time. But it's not until recently that I started to look a little bit deeper into the term perception. And I found that it's a way more complicated thing than we usually think. I've actually heard an unusually few amount of people use it in this seminar, but that may have to do with the composition of the scientists. But perception is the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information in order to fabricate a mental representation through the process of transduction, which senses in the body transforms signals from the environment into encoded neural signals. All perception involves signals in the nervous system, which in turn result from physical stimulation of the sense organs. Now, this is a fairly complex process that's being described there, and I can almost not visualize this without just closing my eyes and going into a deep trance and trying to figure out how these neurons are working in my brain. But perception can be shaped by learning, memory, and expectation. And we're kind of moving into the realm of the intersection between the cultural and the physical, much in the same as the nature-nurture conversation. Perception may be influenced by physical, neurological, and cognitive processes, and by cultural and environmental factors. That means the perception of each individual is influenced by a multitude of factors: sight, smell, vision, taste, experience, memory, political biases, discourse in various forms, our family and friends, our values, our way of life, our motives, greed even, and our worldviews, just to name a few. It is differential at both the individual and the cultural level. External influences the internal. We receive stimulation from the external. The cumulative effect of these processes influence the way in which we perceive of, interpret, and react to, and in the world. These internal influence, in turn, the external in a loop of learning and adaptation. So why is this important at all to talk about perception? Well, I think it is important because it has implications for research, policy, decision-making, cooperation, shared understanding of challenges, which is what we are facing in the Arctic today. We need to figure out a way to find a shared understanding of the challenges that we are facing, the benefits and the risks, and we need to figure out the best way to cooperate. And if we each of us see everything in a different light, then the dialogue has to take place so that we can try to find a common place. It directly influences also the way we analyze and respond to risk, for example, through research, normative frameworks, standards, and requirements. It kind of comes down to this. And this is me trying to simplify in my head what I believe is a very complex problem, and one that I can barely get my head around most times. Perception of risk is understanding of perception of risk directly influences the way in which we perceive, assess, manage, and mitigate risk. that directly influences our institutional robustness, what preventative measures we take and what reactive measures we take. It also influences how strongly we structure the normative framework around, for instance, the activity in the Arctic that will be taking place in the next few decades. This in turn has a direct effect on the level of resilience both in the region itself and in communities. The level of resilience of the region itself and communities determines the outcomes of events such as accidents. And the level of resilience can either create an easily managed situation, a critical status situation, or a full-blown disaster. This is why risk assessment and risk management is very important. It is also a very lengthy process, so we should not wait. I like to refer to the Arctic in general as a wicked problem, which is a term that I heard for the first time 2 years ago at the ICAS. There was a young woman called Mandy Kath who had a very nice presentation on project management in the offshore oil business in the Arctic. It's a phrase originally used in social planning to describe a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. The term wicked is used not in the sense of evil, but rather its resistance to resolution. Moreover, because of complex interdependency, the effort to solve one aspect of a wicked problem may reveal or create other problems. And I find this quite adequately describes what we are faced with in the Arctic today. Thank you.